Good morning, church family. Today we continue on our readings through the book of Luke as we're in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 39. It reads, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw behind them and knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose from prayer and he went back to the disciples, he saw them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation." I love this picture. There's so many layers to it. The first part that Jesus heads out to the Mount of Olives. And if you remember a few days ago, as we were talking about Jesus in Jerusalem, it said that Jesus was preaching every morning in the synagogue, and every evening he was heading out to the Mount of Olives. And here Luke describes what was happening there. It wasn't just, hey, that was just his meeting place in the evening. No, Jesus was regularly going to pray just as he did in this moment. And I think for me, sometimes I lose sight of that. I think about Jesus just praying when it's important, praying at these specific moments. But the reality of what we find as we read through the scriptures about Jesus' relationship with God and his devotion to him was that Jesus was regularly drawing away and praying with his heavenly Father. And then we see the reason why is because what Jesus experienced and went through, there was great temptation to choose his own will, to not walk in obedience with the Father's will. So even though God's will be done no matter what, to begin to lose sight of what God is doing and lose sight of God's leadership and leading in that, and thus falling into temptation and maybe even sin, although we know Jesus would not. But falling into that temptation where we might be tempted to desire a path that was not where God was leading us. And then Jesus returns back to his disciples, and though they're exhausted from sorrow and they're asleep, he says, "Hey, wake up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." Man, I'm just reminded of how important prayer is. You know, so often I think in our Christian life, we think about prayer as being a last resort or when we can't do anything else. But as we look through scriptures, and especially in the example of Jesus, prayer is the foundational thing. Before you tackled any problem, before you shared any words, before you fell into temptation, before you even thought to take a step forward on the path of God's will, you prayed. Because in praying, you might not fall into the temptation of believing that your will is greater than God's will. Because by praying, you might be strengthened by God to withstand what he knows tomorrow holds and what you have no idea is present and coming after you. Man, let us be a people of prayer, a people who pray consistently and continually, who have a spot in our house or a time in the day or a position and a posture where we are continually and regularly returning to God in prayer, to pray for the big things, the small things, but most importantly, to pray that his will would be our will. Man, it's crazy to me because as I think about this, my heart is convicted because I realize all too often I pray the opposite. I pray that God's will is my will. Or maybe more aptly put, that my will is God's will. That what I desire and what I direct and what I'm pursuing after is the same thing that God desires and directs that I'm pursuing after. I lead the way blindly, instead of surrendering and humbling myself in prayer to put God first and to say, I want to follow behind the one who already knows and has already planned out my days. And maybe for you, this is great encouragement. I pray it is. And maybe there's conviction in your heart to get on your knees and pray. Well, that's what I want to do with you, alongside you. If you comment in the section below, I'd love to pray with you. God, let your will be done. I look forward to continue on our study through the book of Luke tomorrow as we continue on in Luke chapter 22.